Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into the life and work of a figure who is just, well, one of the most profound paradoxes in Islamic history.
Mm.
You have this rigorous legal scholar from the absolute cultural elite who basically abandons the comfort of Cairo's courts to become the definitive poetic voice of mystical oneness.
We were talking about Ibn al-Farid, an Egyptian Sufi mystic who lived from 1181 to 1235, and he earned this title, Sultan al-Shikin, the Sultan of Lovers.
And it's a title that is absolutely warranted.
Completely. His verses are, you could argue, the most famous and important body of Arabic Sufi poetry ever composed.
So our mission today is really to get at how his poetry managed to do what theory so often can't. And to articulate that inexpressible experience of losing yourself and finding God.
And in doing so, he set the whole aesthetic standard for mystical expression.
You really have to put him alongside his great contemporary Ibn Arabi to get the full picture.
Absolutely. If Ibn Arabi is the monumental metaphysician, the theorist who wrote thousands upon thousands of pages explaining how God is unified with creation,
then Ibn al-Farid is the master poet who lets you feel that unity.
Exactly. He still dominates the Arabic realm of devotional poetry.
I mean, think about that for a second. Verses written nearly 800 years ago are still sung today.
Right, in formal Sufi ceremonies, public gatherings, especially all throughout Egypt. And that lasting popularity really speaks to the heart of Sufism itself, or Tasawwuf.
It's such a diverse path.
It's profoundly diverse, but it maintains its spiritual core while adapting local forms, whether that's music, recitation, poetry, to reach this aesthetic expression. Ibn al-Farid is really the zenith of this specifically Arabic tradition.
So if he is the gold standard, we have to ask, how did he reach this level? Let's start at the beginning. Who was the man behind the title?
Well, he was born in 1181 in Cairo.
Yeah.
His name, Ibn al-Farid, it actually means son of the women's advocate.
Which is a direct reference to his father's job, right? A legal advocate.
Precisely. Which immediately tells you something about his early life. He came from a well-established, well-off family.
Meaning he got a top-tier education, religious sciences, legal sciences.
All of it. He studied the Shafi'i school of Islamic law and became a respected expert on hadith, the collections of the traditions and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad.
So you have this picture of a respected scholar, totally comfortable in Cairo's scholarly elite, teaching high-level law and poetry.
But even early on, there was this other side to him, this inner restlessness, a profound spiritual drive that kept pulling him away from the city.
He started retreating. I've read that he would leave the city to just wander and contemplate in the hills outside Cairo.
Yes, and this is where the line between, let's say, history and hagiography starts to blur a bit.
You're talking about the legend of him meeting the Sufi saint.
The famous tale, yeah. He meets a saint outside Cairo who tells him he has to go to Mecca to truly realize his spiritual potential. And when Ibn al-Farid hesitates, saying how far it is.
The saint performs a miracle and just reveals Mecca right there in front of them.
Right, and whether you take that literally or as a metaphor, it supports the historical records that he did spend a very long time, maybe 15 years in Mecca.
Studying, learning, immersing himself in the deepest parts of the Sufi path.
And when he came back to Cairo, he was this accomplished mystic, poet, and scholar all in one. He even taught at the prestigious Al-Azhar Mosque.
Which puts him right back in the center of the cultural and intellectual world. But I'm still stuck on that contrast. This is a man who could have easily used his poetic talent to get patronage from the powerful rulers of the day. That was the standard career path.
It was.
But his entire collection of poetry, his diwan, it has 0 poems dedicated to political leaders, not one.
And that is absolutely a deliberate choice. It reflects that core Sufi principle of renunciation. For him, the focus had to be purely spiritual, completely divorced from the distractions of worldly power. He was rejecting the whole system.
He was essentially saying, my beloved is not the Sultan, but God.
Exactly. It makes that paradox disciplined scholar by day, ecstatic lover by night, even sharper.
But we should be a little careful with what we know about him personally.
That's a very good point. The earliest biographies, they mostly treat him as a respected, technically brilliant poet. It was his grandson, Ali, who wrote the really famous hagiographical account later on.
And his goal was to really cement his grandfather's status as a saint, a top-tier mystic.
Right. The grandson was definitely trying to solidify the spiritual pedigree of the family. So you have to read it with that in mind.
But the poetry itself, I mean, that's the primary source.
Yeah.
And it completely validates the mystical heights he claimed to have reached.
Without a doubt.
So let's get into that. Let's talk about the spiritual architecture here.
Yeah.
If someone listening is new to Sufism, how do we explain the ultimate goal of this journey?
The goal is intimacy with the divine. It's a path of spiritual travel that's all about purification. It means turning away from the nafs.
The nafs being the ego, the independent self, the part of you that thinks it's separate from God.
Exactly. And you keep turning away from it until that self is just completely dissolved.
That's Fana, annihilation. The moment the ego dies and you have this ultimate realization of oneness.
Yes, and we need to be clear. This isn't just like grim self-denial. It's a joyful dissolution. It's realizing that the separation was the painful illusion all along. The goal is to forget yourself and only remember God.
And Sufis have specific practices to get to that state, the main one being Dhikr, or remembrance.
Right, which is often practiced through this rhythmic, intense chanting of God's names or the proclamation of faith, sometimes for hours and hours.
Ibn al-Farid talks about this directly, doesn't he? He frames prayer itself as an act of intimate remembrance.
He does. He has this line, I pray and so chant when I recite in memory of her, and I delight in the prayer niche while she is my imam. So the beloved is both the focus of the prayer and the guide leading it.
But the most dramatic practice, the one he was famous for, was sama.
Audition or listening. This is the spiritual practice of listening to recited poetry or music, often with instruments, sometimes even dance, all designed to induce a state of ecstasy or waj.
And this is where his reputation as an ecstatic comes from. The stories about him are incredible.
They really are. And it wasn't always in a formal setting. Sometimes he would just spontaneously enter this state.
I love that story about the marketplace. He's in the middle of Cairo, and he hears some guards walking by, beating clappers and singing a simple folk song.
And he just shouts out a matching verse, bursts into this spontaneous dance.
And the energy is so powerful that the crowd around him, people who don't even know him, just collapse to the ground in this shared ecstatic state.
That image, a famous scholar dancing in the streets and causing this spiritual ripple effect, that tells you everything about the raw power he was channeling.
He even explains the legitimacy of that practice with this beautiful analogy in his poetry. He compares sama to a lullaby.
It's so profound. He says that the rhythmic singing soothes the listener, and it makes the child forget his bitter state and remember a secret whisper of ancient ages.
Wow.
So the poetry, the sama, it's reminding the soul of its pre-eternal unity with God. It helps the spirit soar back to where it came from.
Okay, so this brings us to what feels like the biggest question. We have a man who is an expert in the Shafi school of law, which is all about strict rules and the outward duties of a Muslim.
The Sharia, yes.
And yet his poetry expresses this radical monism, this idea of oneness of being. How did he, or how did other Orthodox scholars reconcile those two things?
This is such a vital point. The key is that Sufis, like Ibn al-Farid, were not rejecting the Sharia. They were deeply observant Muslims.
So they were still doing the 5 daily prayers, fasting, pilgrimage.
All of it. They saw the Sharia as the essential container, the framework.
So the law is the path.
The law is the path. It's the outer reality, the discipline you have to maintain. But what Ibn al-Farid is seeking is the hakika, the ultimate inner reality. The law is the how, but hakika is the what.
I see. So a Sufi can reach Fana, that state of annihilation, and realize this ultimate unity.
Right.
But when they come back to the world, they're still performing their prayers. On the surface, their actions look the same.
Exactly the same. But the inner motivation, the understanding behind the action, is completely transformed. The scholar's discipline was just the preparation for the mystic's insight.
Which brings us to the poems themselves. The result of these ecstatic trance states he was known for?
Sometimes for 10 days straight, without eating or drinking, he would come out of it and immediately dictate these verses.
His diwan is small, but so focused. It's all about the Sufi path, that divine longing, using the language of earthly love as a metaphor for the divine.
And he's really known for 2 great masterpieces. The first, and the shorter one, is Al-Kamriya, the Wine Ode.
This poem is just a masterclass in symbolism. Wine is divine love. Intoxication is the ecstatic state.
That leads to the extinction of the self.
Yeah.
And it has that one quote that just defines his entire cosmic vision.
In memory of the beloved, we drank a wine. We were drunk with it before creation of the vine.
Just stop there for a second. That is a breathtaking statement.
It is.
He's saying that this mystical state, this intoxication of divine love, it isn't something that happens after creation. It's eternal. The love itself predates time and the universe. When a mystic experiences it, they are tapping into the original, timeless presence of God.
It completely redefines reality. It's not just a personal feeling. He's remembering a cosmic event.
Exactly. And then you have his magnum opus, Ataya al-Kubra, the Great Ode.
At 761 verses, it's considered the longest mystical poem in Arabic. It's a complete epic narrative of the spiritual journey.
It's the whole path, from separation to union. It starts with the poet just intensely longing for his beloved, usually using the feminine pronoun her, but his longing is, well, it's rooted in pride, in his own piety.
And the beloved rejects him for it. That's the crisis point of the whole poem, isn't it?
It is. The beloved basically tells him he's too focused on his own devotion, his own self-importance, and then lays down the truth. You never loved me so long as you were not lost in me.
In other words, the poet's own independent ego is the only barrier.
That's the barrier. So the poet finally understands he achieves complete submission, Fana, and that leads to the climax. Union. Both of us, one worshiper bowing to his reality in union in every prostration, the I is gone.
But the journey doesn't end there, which is so crucial.
No. After Fana comes the stage of Baka, subsistence in God. The mystic returns to the world, but they're no longer fooled by multiplicity. They see all the different things in the world, people, trees, events, as just reflections of the one reality.
This is the realization of Wadat al-Wujud, the oneness of being. The beloved was never far away, never external.
The search itself was the act of hiding and revealing. He captures this so perfectly in the verse where he says, I sought her for myself. She was there all along. How strange that I had concealed her from me.
Calling to myself from me to guide me by my voice to that part of me lost in my search, me begging me to raise the screen. It's incredible. The self was the veil and the self is the guide.
And that ties everything back to the cosmic purpose you mentioned earlier, that famous Hadith Qudsi, where God says, I was a hidden treasure and I loved to be known, so I created the world that I might be known.
That hadith is the philosophical anchor for this entire tradition.
It is. Love is the force that starts creation. And if creation is God seeking to be known, then the mystic's job is to complete that circle, to fulfill that reciprocity through perfect love and knowledge.
And Ibn al-Farid takes it to its absolute peak, that final vision where he sees himself in every particle of existence. Every atom of me witnessing her loveliness with every glance of every shining eye.
It's a staggering claim. He's identifying himself with every seeking soul, every part of creation. It's this level of poetic synthesis that made his work immortal.
He died in 1235 at 54 years old. He was buried at the foot of Mount Muqattam.
The very same hills outside Cairo where he used to retreat as a young seeker. His shrine is still a major pilgrimage site today.
And his legacy was cemented almost immediately after he died, mainly because of the Akbarian school, the followers of Ibn Arabi.
That's right. Ibn Arabi's own stepson, Sadruddin al-Qunawi, lectured extensively on the Great Ode, on Ataya al-Kubra.
And this is really where the theoretical and the poetic just fuse together. Ibn Arabi had built this incredibly complex metaphysical system in prose, explaining the nature of the oneness of being.
But metaphysics can be very, very dry. The Akbarians found in Ibn al-Farid's poetry the perfect poetic vessel for their master's ideas.
Right. Because poetry allows for ambiguity, for paradox, for that soaring language. You need to describe something that's ultimately ineffable.
You can't do that with dense philosophical prose. It just doesn't work the same way. So his poems became the authorized emotional, spiritual language of Wadat al-Wujud.
Making that abstract concept feel relatable through passion and metaphor.
Absolutely. And even if you say the Akbarians sort of projected their specific ideas onto him, the technical brilliance and the profound spiritual sincerity of his verse just stands on its own. He became the voice of the ecstatic heart of Sufism.
And today, his legacy is not some dusty relic. His poems are still sung, you can find recordings. They're performed at celebrations all across Egypt.
He transformed the path from separation to unity into a poetic journey. He showed that scholarly discipline and ecstatic experience are really two sides of the same coin. He showed us the power of language to try and reach what words were never really meant to touch.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, beyond just the history and the poetry? We've learned that, according to that Hadith Qudsi, God created the world out of love, seeking to be known.
And if love is the foundational purpose of all creation, and if to love is to know intimately, then the mystical journey is really just participating in that cosmic reciprocal exchange.
So what hidden treasure are you currently concealing within yourself that, through an act of love or deep reflection, you might be ready to finally reveal? What small action can you take today to participate in that essential loving movement of the universe?